This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London.
Can I welcome members and officers here at City Hall and the public in the gallery or watching on the webcast to today's meeting of the GLA Oversight Committee. Can I remind participants to turn your phones off and put them on silent, and also ask members to ensure electronic devices aren't in front of your microphones. Can I ask the clerk, Nicoletta Kemp, to confirm any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Assembly Member Giorgio, for who Assembly Member Boff is substituting. Also joining us on Zoom is Assembly Member Bukhari.
Thank you very much. On to declarations of interest. Can we note the list of offices held by Assembly members?
Noted.
Thank you. And can I ask members if they have any disclosable pecuniary interests in specific items listed on the agenda? Perfect. On to the minutes. Can we agree the approval of the minutes for the committee held on the 18th of December 2024 be deferred to the February to allow for changes to be made to the wording of item 8, review of PQT? Agreed. Thank you. The summary list of actions. I've got an indication from Assembly Member Russell.
Yes, very pleased to see the action, which is actually from the Elections Review Working Group meeting from the 16th of October. We've now been sent a link to the video explaining the New Zealand voting system, and I can confirm it is the simplest and most easy to understand description of a voting system that I've ever seen so far, and I hope that the GLA comms team will take note of it, and perhaps we could send the video to them so that they can take note of it when they're doing the communications around the voting system for the next Assembly and Mayor elections.
Amazing, thank you. And with that highlight of the summary of a list of actions, can we note the completed and ongoing actions arising from previous meetings of the Oversight Committee? Noted, but same. Yeah, thank you. Action taken under delegated authority. There's a couple of long ones here, so please bear with. Can I ask committee to note the following recent action taken by me as chair under delegated authority and in consultation with the deputy chair and party group lead members to agree the letter to the Mayor of London on the arrangements for the December People's Question Time event as set out in Appendix 1. Agreed. And can I also ask the committee to note the action taken by me as chair under delegated authority in consultation with the deputy chair, party group lead members and the chair of the Elections Review Working Group to agree the working group's report on London's elections 2024 as set out in Appendix 2?
Noted.
Thank you. Response to committee outputs. Can we note the responses from the Assistant Director of External Relations, GLA, to the committee's letters on the arrangements for People's Question Time held on 12th of December 2024 and on the arrangements for London's New Year's fireworks event?
Noted.
Thank you. And on to our first main item of today, resilience. Thank you both for waiting patiently there. Can I welcome to the chamber Catherine Richardson, Director of Resilience, and Kristen Grieder. Sure, I mean, okay, because you can correct me. Head of Strategy, Prevention and Community Resilience, also joining on Zoom, and I can see he is there, so that's a good start. Steve Miller, Covenant at the London Borough Faith Network. So welcome to the meeting, all of you, and I'm going to start by handing over to Assembly Member Mahfouz to start the questioning.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. So I wanted to just start off, clearly resilience is an incredibly important issue and has come up time and time again, both, and we'll go into more detail about, obviously, sort of response to the pandemic, from a climate point of view, etc. But one of the focuses we'll have is around community engagement. If we look at the structure, it's quite a clearly, again, resilience has to work at a number of different levels. And so you've got a very complicated structure in terms of both strategic, operational engagement with the public and so on. How do you feel that the structure at the moment works to maximise community engagement? I'll start off with Catherine.
Thank you for the question. Can you hear me all right? Brilliant. So, I mean, you're absolutely right to identify it as an issue, and you'll have seen in the COVID inquiry report, it's an issue that's come up there, and in fact, in a number of inquiries, this same issue has come up about the complexity of resilient systems. So it is something that we're really conscious of, and both here in London and I know in government as well, are thinking about are there ways to sort of streamline and simplify. I mean, when it comes to community engagement into that structure, we absolutely understand the importance of community engagement in resilience. You know, no matter what we have in place in terms of emergency services and preparation and response, it's always the community who are essentially the first responders and who feel really the most impact and the biggest and longest lasting impacts. So that's why we're really keen to make sure that people are at the heart of resilience and what we're doing. But we do know, as I say, from any number of inquiries, that is still a gap there about how that kind of feeds into those sort of more formal structures of the London Resilience Forum, and kind of the whole system around that. I mean, we do have representatives from the voluntary and community sector at the LRF, as well as faith and belief sector. And of course, we work closely with them outside of those formal structures as well, which I hope we'll get a chance to talk to you more about. In our Stronger LRF bid, which we might get onto, we included work to identify and address the structural aspects undermining individual or community resilience. So, thinking about that as well. But I think it's fair to say that communities don't necessarily feel connected into those statutory kind of structures. That's exactly why we have the programme of work that, that Kristen leads, and that hopefully we'll get a chance to kind of get into now.
Brings us on to yourself, Kristen.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, so I think Catherine said it pretty well. I think there is a perception among communities. I mean, we know this from all those various inquiries. We know it from our own bits of research. We know it from, even the London Climate Resilience Review, various reports and things like that all say that there is that disconnect between communities and the statutory authorities who plan for and respond to emergencies. And so, I mean, in terms of the structures, I think we work with them as well as we can in terms of, there is that strategic representation through the London Communities Emergencies Partnership, and Steve can talk a little bit more about that probably. But a lot of the work we're doing is actually on the ground because that's where communities are, in local areas. And so I'd say the sort of guiding principle for all of the work we do is to kind of address that problem. So it's about trying to make those links between those statutory authorities and the community and voluntary and faith sector groups who are, the ones actually dealing with stuff on the ground. We all learn, when we're doing our training on like Jessup principles or magic training that, you have to make friends before you need them in this space. And that's kind of what we're trying to do, is make those introductions, help to establish some of those networks, help to establish the relationships and build trust, and also provide communities with the kind of tools and resources and capacity that can help them to do the things that, they might need to do in this space, like plan and, create their own kind of networks and asset and their understanding of their assets and things like that.
Thank you. And Steve?
Hi, thank you. Excuse me. I could spend the whole time saying from the community side and from the faith and belief sector side what the public sector ought to be doing to reach out better to us. But I'll actually start from the other side, because when I talk to my colleagues across the faith sector, which is a very, very huge and diverse sector, I always say this is a two-way street. If we want to be in this conversation, we have to learn some of the culture, the language, the structures in the public sector world. So there is that. Nevertheless, I think resilient structures in London, excuse me, are impenetrable to most people who are at kind of grassroots level, leading in local faith or community groups. Part of what we do as part of our community resilience training program is to help to raise or reveal from the fog a little bit to those people, so that they are enabled to engage more, both at a borough level and a London level, so that sort of untapped or partly untapped asset in communities can be helped to realise its potential. So it's learning, it's hard work. I think you have to, from our side, it takes a long time to actually understand what the structures are, how they work, how we can engage. But I think it's what I try to say to my colleagues across the sector is that it's worth it if we want to be in full partnership, which we do in this work, and not just in a crisis. In a crisis, we all pull together, but we're sort of if you haven't done that groundwork, and Kristen kind of referred to it, the work that you spend building relationships over years, if you haven't done that groundwork and understanding the structures, then you're always going to be having to work harder than you need to do.
Thank you, Steve. And clearly there, I think you've expressed the sort of the balance to be had between clearly lots of informal or even sort of formal community groups across London, which are the backbone of being able to deliver some of the stuff alongside. Obviously, clearly, very much has to be around the process and systems in place to protect and lead. We've had Steve describe it, the structure at the moment, as being impenetrable. What would you say in terms of, you talked about the future, stronger LRF bid? How are you looking to, just focusing on the structure for now, how are you looking to reform that to ensure that it's not impenetrable going forward?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think there's two elements really. Firstly is what central government is looking at. So some of things like the local resilience forum, the LRF system, is statutory, and so we legally have to have certain meetings that do certain things. So that whole system is being looked at, led by Cabinet Office under their resilience review. They're looking, is the system fit for purpose? Although it's a relatively short, they're hoping to have that completed sort of, spring this year. So we, as you would expect, have really close relationships with London, and we're meeting regularly to feed into that. David Bellamy has met the Minister Pongasari in the Cabinet Office to talk about that. So there's something about how we influence that system, which is absolutely about us making points that Steve and our other colleagues would make about the system. But that aside, there's always the question about whether we know the system is complex. Is it the right level of complexity to deal with what we need? Because when we're talking about multi-agency responses with not just Blue Lights colleagues, but Faith and, indeed 170 plus organisations across London, I think it's always going to feel a bit complex. But there's questions about whether it looks right, and I think even around things like the language we use. We use a lot of jargon. I've worked in security and resilience for many years, and I know we speak a different language sometimes, and it makes it particularly difficult for people, to have a conversation. So there's some simple things around that. The Stronger LRFs bid. So Stronger LRFs was a pilot scheme that we bid into. That scheme, unfortunately, didn't get off the ground before the general election, but ministers are now looking at it again under a new name, Trailblazers. And so we've been clear that, yes, London would definitely like to bid in again, and we're hopeful that we will get some funding there, and that will be to look at, amongst other things, the system, including kind of beneath the London Resilience Forum level, if you like, at the Borough Resilience Forums. And part of what I'm doing with the London Resilience Unit is looking at the London Resilience Programme Board that sits underneath the LRF, making sure that, the right resources are in place. It's looking at the right work, which again is partly about then that is how we make sure the London Resilience Forum is doing what it should do and being able to have that really strategic conversation, because lots of the sort of heavy lifting, if you like, it is done at that other level.
Sorry, Assembly Member Mahfouz, if I could just interject for 1 second. We're joined today by the London Explorers Club, so welcome to today's oversight meeting. Thank you for finding us today. We're having a discussion on how the community is engaged with London's resilience plans for major incidents and events in London.
Welcome. And Kristen, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I probably can't say a whole lot about how we can potentially change resilient structures, but I think a couple of things are clear. I mean, one is that, again, all the evidence tells us that communities really need to be centered in resilience planning and in response. So they really need to be part of that. And that's something that we need to figure out how to do. And I think one of the things that we always understand from all the work we've done is that you also have to resource people for this. I mean, we have first responders who are, this is their profession and their role. But if we're really trying to center communities in this work, then we need to provide them with the ability to contribute and to make their contribution. So, I can't necessarily talk to the structures, but I can say, like Steve, probably can, that there are lots and lots of ways that we could make the whole system a bit more accessible.
Steve, I can see you itching, wanting to come in on this.
Yeah, if I can. Less about the structures, because the structures are only one part of the whole story. And I do want to say that Catherine referred in passing to language, but the people are the other part of the story, and the relationships with the people. And I think particularly during and post-COVID, what I have perceived, and I've said this on many occasions, is that the professionals working, whether they're in what is now London Resilience Unit or whether they're in the emergency services, there is a real change of culture, professional culture, at least led from the top, in terms of wanting to engage with communities. Now, that intention and that aspiration and changing culture is not an easy thing. And the kinds of professional cultures in some of those organizations are quite traditional. So having a change of culture which is more open to the kind of Wild West of communities, which is very different from the command and control world of the emergency services, that's something which is kind of ongoing. But I do think that that aspiration, that intention is there. And I would say, you would expect me to say in relation to Kristen's comment, that organizations like us, we're kind of a specialist infrastructure organization that tries to bridge the gap, that tries to bring people together. And we're not frontline and we're not emergency services, but we provide a very specialist role. And resourcing that, I would say that is really, really crucial to enabling this conversation to develop and enabling this move forward on the, in the trajectory that we want it to move forward effectively.
Thank you, Steve. As somebody who's run a charity up until getting this job, I completely appreciate where you're coming from, and also work very closely with VCS organisations that coordinate that sort of work. So actually it sort of brings me neatly on to one aspect of the structure is the LCEP, which is the London Communities Engagement Partnership, which is currently funded, but I don't know when that comes to an end. So how are we making sure that we're making best use of that at the moment, and what's the longer term vision beyond the funding?
Yeah, so that has funding. I believe we've the funding agreement that we had with them, and we're only one of the funders of that, and probably kind of a minor funder of that. That funding agreement was for 3 years, and so that ends in March. We have negotiated with various partners to extend that and to make a contribution to extend that for another year. And yeah, so we're hoping that they can potentially be on a more sustainable footing after that, and we can try to find other kinds of avenues of funding for that. But I think, what's really important about the LSEP, the London Communities Emergencies Partnership, is this is for the first time, I think, we actually have an organization that we've been able to resource that kind of coordination support. So, oftentimes this is always done in people's spare time. It's like people like Steve, giving their time and what have you. But to actually have a core of people that can do that coordination work, actually reach out to the different partners to, build the networks of partner organizations, coordinate the training, set agendas for the meetings, and actually, do all of that kind of logistical work is absolutely crucial to making this stuff happen. Because with that, we can reach out to a much wider range of communities. With that, we can really coordinate and a lot of work and support. And we've seen, I think I provided a little briefing prior to this meeting, but we've seen LSEP really demonstrate its value in recent types of incidents and events. And they're providing support before things happen, by providing training and, briefings, and by helping us with the Community Resilience Fund, for example. And then during and, just prior to incidents as well, they're there coordinating volunteers and reaching out to communities and finding out, what communities need, and just getting that kind of intelligence for us, and also supporting communities. So we've seen that that's, incredibly useful, and it sort of supplants the former voluntary sector panel on the LRF to be that voice of the community and voluntary and faith and equality sector organizations on the LRF. And so we really need that to continue. So I think, Steve's point too about resources is really important, and it's really difficult to kind of keep that kind of program of work, and to keep kind of a vision for the future, and to really make any plans when your funding is really dependent from year to year.
Yeah, I completely appreciate when you're running, particularly for these voluntary and community sector groups, if you don't know if the funding's in place for longer than a year, it's really difficult to keep that going. So just on the, so obviously you've got the funding for another year on that front, and is that something you're hoping to be able to build into the structure, sort of embed that going forward as part of the conversations that you're having more widely?
Yeah, I think it's kind of all to play for. I think we need to work out what our funding potentially is going to be from government. A lot of our community resilience activity has been funded by MHCLG, so we're still waiting to hear about what that will look like over the coming, couple of years. We still also need to talk with other partners and other funders, but I think, been really grateful that that City Hall has been able to put in a little bit of money, because not only does it help, but it also helps to kind of demonstrate to partners that we're serious about this, and it helps to lever in funding from others as well. So, yeah, we would hope so. Taking a step back, the whole purpose of all of this structure, the work, is effectively, the why that sits behind it is to make sure that these frontline community groups are as well positioned as possible to support the state in providing that resilience. Clearly in London we've got that complicated structure again of, the GLA, you've got the 32 boroughs in the city, which, again, going back to your point, Catherine, makes it even more complicated because you've got then 32 LRFs, local resilience forums across London. How well does the coordination work between those 32 boroughs and ourselves as the GLA?
Thank you. So, yeah, the Borough Resilience Forums are set up not as kind of miniature London Resilience Forums. They do something slightly different, and originally they were set up to help kind of promote communication between local authorities and emergency services. One of the challenges that they have is that whether you are a community representing community groups, or if you are really any organisation, to try to service those 33 borough resilience forums in addition to the London Resilience Forum is really difficult. So that's why through the Stronger LRFs and now the Trailblazers, we're really wanting to kind of target some support in that area. And that's also why when we're talking to government, that is very high up on our list alongside communities work of where we think some more kind of support is needed. That said, from the London Resilience Unit, from my team, we do attend every Borough Resilience Forum at least annually, and we also hold twice yearly forums for them to come together to share best practice, talk about risk, that kind of thing. And there is lots of good practice going on in this area. So just to, if I could just give you one example from the Southwark Borough Resilience Forum, where they recently held an exercise and invited some of their youth representatives to take part in the exercise, because it was about a kind of a public event. So, it's where young people would have been. And actually got really good feedback from people who'd been involved, as well as it made the exercise a lot more credible and useful. So that's now being shared as kind of good practice amongst the Borough Resilience Forums.
One last question, and then I think Assembly Member Bakari also wanted to come in on this. So just in terms of perhaps, Steve, you can kick us off by explaining what the faith sector panel does in relation to the work on resilience and how that's working at the moment and how well you think that's working.
Okay, I wanted to also add how we are linked with LSEP, the London Community Emergency Panel, because we're very much integrated with them. So we describe ourselves as part of LSEP and separate. The faith and belief sector is huge and diverse, as I said, and important, but we are also part of that wider sector, and I may come back to that in a second. Pre-COVID, I think there were some parallels. The previous panels, both the voluntary sector panel and the faith sector panel, relied on sort of a small number of high-profile organisations, and in the faith sector, it tended to be certain individuals from the Church of England acting kind of on behalf of the whole faith sector. Which was okay up to a point, and up to a point quite efficient because it's a small number of people, but also beyond that, not very effective because it didn't reach out to large proportions of London's faith communities. The structures that we have now include both in LSEP and in Faith and Belief Sector Panel are much more inclusive of communities of all kinds of complexions. And what we're doing is, again, moving from maybe what I've called the grandees, the people at the top of the tree who are really important when you need certain kinds of moments in history or response to something, to dramatic events. But in terms of actually doing work on the ground, you need all the grafters who are in the middle, people who are making their communities work day by day and week by week. And what we're trying to do in the sort of slightly reconstructed Faith and Belief Sector Panel is to tap into those people who are working in local networks, so whether they're borough interfaith networks or whether they're single denomination networks of, regionally or across London even, that we're working with those people who are making their own faith communities work well and bringing them in to this world of engagement with the wider public sphere. It's a work in progress, and people are busy, obviously, but it is something that I think we see real development. Say if I'm comparing now to a year ago, and I'm thinking of who I can call upon when there is, when there is an incident, who I can access, who might be able to tap into local or sub-regional resources, and we're in a much better place now than we were a year ago. And if I can say the incident that some people may be aware of, the gas outage in North London, the volunteer response to give welfare support to 3,000 households has been very different now from what it might have been a year ago in terms of local faith and community groups' involvement. I'm now not sure whether I answered your question directly or whether I drifted off course.
No, well, thank you very much, Steve. That's incredibly impressive, and I'll leave it there because I know other questions will come to you about the topic, but just to finish off by saying a huge thank you for everything that yourselves and the networks are doing. So thank you.
Thanks for that. And Kristen, I just wanted to come back to something you said about the London Communities Engagement Partnership being really helpful in a number of incidents. What kind of incident? I mean, we just heard about the gas outage there. What kinds of incidents are there that where this really comes into play, and are there others where it's less likely that you'll use that network?
Thanks. Yeah, I think, so, I mean, recent ones that I can think of are when we had the SWEP activation. So that's the severe weather emergency protocol because of the cold weather, or it could be because of hot weather. So in that case, over this current winter and over last winter as well, I mean, they were able to help mobilize volunteers to open up rest centers for people for that. I've also got, like, I think a list. So there's the Spectrum House residential tower block fire, able to just kind of reach out to communities and find out, where is stuff needed, and help to coordinate volunteers again, that type of thing. We did a lot of work just sort of talking among community partners and getting messages out during the disorder that was happening in the rest of the country over the summer. We've had some engagement around, like with migration team and with government and local government, about the potential for a Lebanon evacuation. So just trying to work out what the scenario planning for that might look like. So that was ahead of an evacuation that didn't, in fact, occur after that point. Yeah, so it's those types of events or incidents, but anything, I think, that sort of gets onto our radar where we say, something's happening that might be causing some real problems in a community. We can call up, what I would do potentially is call up, someone from LSAP, or, get in touch with them and say, are you guys aware of what's going on? Do you know if people need anything? And they're able to kind of, because they've built that infrastructure that Steve talked about, they're able to kind of reach out to people, find out, who's been affected, find out, what people might need, find out how the borough is doing in terms of managing and all of that kind of stuff. In terms of the types of incidents, I don't think there's really necessarily a particular type of incident. It's just, when we know that there's some sort of, something that's going on, and it may not even be classed like a major incident or, something that the wider strategic partnership is responding to in an official way, but it'll be something that we know is happening on the ground that, potentially needs some sort of volunteer support.
Thank you. I'm going to pass over to Steve. Was it a legacy handle for this?
No, just a quick addition to what Kristen said. There are all those kinds of incidents where sort of multiple households, hundreds or sometimes thousands, are affected, and there's a kind of welfare operation. But I just wanted to remind people a very different kind of incident, tragic incident, the murder of the boy in Hainault last year. It's a very, very different kind of thing, but it affected lots of people, particularly in the immediate area, deeply emotionally, very quickly and suddenly. And I think the community groups and the way the community groups work with local authority there, it's not necessarily, it was obviously a police issue at one point, but it's not necessarily, as it goes on, a wider emergency services type incident, but it is something that shocks a whole neighborhood and also triggers people in the wider community. So there's that wider aspect that I think faith and community groups are able to support the emergency services, local authorities and others, NHS, police. We're able to provide that kind of person-to-person knowledge, understanding, connection.
Thank you. Assembly Member Bakari.
Thank you, Chair. So my questions are going to be focusing on the faith sector panel. So Steve, you and I are going to have quite a few questions together to tackle right now, because my main area of interest, particularly when it comes to the engagement of communities, is making sure there is a level of trust. And I think trust has been a big factor within improving engagement. Would you say that lessons have been learned from, for example, Grenfell and even the pandemic, where there were lots of good things that happened, from the way we think that things could be improved? Or do you think there has been any progress since those particular interests when it comes to trust and engagement?
I think it's not an across the board answer, because there's we're talking about different organisations, and as I said before, we'd also talk about different individuals. So if I can, and I don't want this to be taken out of proportion, but with, for example, relationships with Met Police, at some levels, there's still a long way to go in terms of building community trust. But at another level, when I talk to people and talk about, your local faith engagement officer and assembly members may be aware in each basic command unit, there's command units, there's a faith engagement officer. They have an intention to have a faith engagement officer in every borough, but that's not quite yet. And people have a very good relationship with that person. Sometimes they move on, and that also affects trust. And again, not just that one organisation. I'm talking about NHS, I'm talking about local authorities as well. You build trust with a key individual, and that individual moves on. We stick around, mostly. Faith communities are there, week in, week out, month in, month out. So that work to build that trust, to build the relationship is endless. It's ongoing. You have to keep at it. I would say after COVID, so I would say all that great work, what the intention is to not lose all the good practice, but inevitably it kind of goes back a little bit to status quo. So we have to work hard, and we have to work harder to remember what we did well when we were in a real crisis and see if we can build that into the permanent structures.
And as you say, I mean, I know from my time on the what was called the FREP committee, the fire, it's now called fire, but we did talk a lot about the impact that the resilience impact it had on the London Fire Brigade and the way they work with communities. There's been some real progress within the London Fire Brigade. Do you think that kind of level of progress is similar to other institutions? You just mentioned the Metropolitan Police. There could be more work similar to what the London Fire Brigade are doing in the Metropolitan Police as well.
I think, look, the intention is there, and I see it. As I say, I don't want to get that out of proportion. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner regularly has meetings with faith leaders, and I can see the intention. And I think that in practice there's a long way to go. But I think there's also, they have particular history and particular issues. But you could also say in the health service there are issues in terms of, we obviously suffered through one massive pandemic, and we hope that will never happen again on that scale. But there are other things in terms of health issues that may be on the horizon that are part of the risk, and building those relationships with those services is important. So I think everybody, all of those institutions are on a journey of engagement with the community sector. I think one of the challenges is that if you are a faith leader, a local faith leader or a London or national faith leader, and you're asked to engage with all of these different organizations, it's overwhelming. And no matter what the goodwill, everybody would like to engage with faith communities because they see the potential, but the ability to be able to respond is limited by obvious common sense capacity, time people have available, energy people have available. When people came out of COVID, people were exhausted, but want to show goodwill. So there are some natural limits to how fast we can go in all of this work.
I think that's really kind of one of the challenges that particularly the faith sector has. It's that reliance on volunteers, as you say. A lot of people are doing this on their own time. A lot of the people that you've just referring to have probably other things to do in their life and jobs and commitments. So in terms of that kind of challenge, do you find that challenge within your own structure of the London Faith and Belief Sector panel that you yourself are struggling to make? Is there a challenge in making sure that all faiths feel fully represented, equally. And that is really difficult to do, considering those resources and the capacity that you were just referring to.
I think we work hard. I'd like to think that across all the different faith traditions and the non-faith belief traditions as well, that we're touching base with most of the large and small faith traditions. People, as you say, have there are varying capacities. So where a community may have some full-time employees, that's slightly easier. Where they don't, that's slightly more difficult. But we're doing that, and in different ways, as I said right earlier, through denominational contacts, but also through borough interfaith, multi-faith forums where people are coming at it from a different way. So we're touching base with them as well. So that, we had a meeting earlier this week on Monday, focused on public health with people from both those worlds, denominational leaders, borough faith forum leaders, coming together. And I think if you looked around that table on Monday, you'd see a fairly good representation of different kinds of groups. Not everybody, it's impossible to have everybody around the table. But
it's very challenging. Particularly, I'm very familiar with interfaith work, and it's not easy to make sure that every voice is heard. But you strive to do that, and I'm pleased to hear that.
Can I just add, just as a lovely anecdotal thing, I mentioned the North London gas outage. The groups are just, I don't know how, why, but it's just a lovely thing. The groups that have responded best to the request for volunteers have been two of the smallest faith groups in that particular area, and it's just been lovely to see their willingness to offer volunteers and to pitch up and actually be involved. So, that's been a real positive for us.
It's wonderful to see that happening, especially when there is a time of crisis and need. And I think this is why there's such an important element and need for the faith communities to be part of this engagement. My last question is just, again, about the dynamics and structure within the panel itself. It's currently chaired by two people, the Bishop Cutting and Dr. Chadha. Do the chairing of the panel, does it change regularly? Do you make sure that there are different faith groups represented? How does that structure work?
I think the chairing is something that's in transition. It used to be a single chair who was a senior Church of England official, and the chairs represent us. They have a representative function at meetings of, for example, the London Resilience Forum. In terms of the practical doing, I think the tiny professional team that we have, so I'm on a consultancy basis part-time, and I have a colleague who's also part-time, but we take the lead in actually making things happen. So that's the way it works. It's not intended to be this kind of democratic structure where everybody's elected every year or something. And in fact, Bishop Cutting wanted to stand down when he was made a bishop last year, and I said, please stay on, because actually he's got the experience, he's got local connections, not just the fact that actually having a particular title has a certain amount of status. It's because he's got that experience.
Brilliant. So there's a lot of consistency within the doers, as I call them, people who actually get on with things. So that's good to hear. Thank you very much, Chair. I think I'll leave it there.
And can I say, I'm going to shoot off because I have to pick my grandchildren up from school.
Yeah, of course, Steve. I understand that. I just wanted to clarify, if you can, before you go, if there was any kind of recommendations you would want to see to either change or improve the way things are. Is there anything you could think of that you would like to see implemented?
One thing, I think it's pretty impossible. I think, if you're going to put me on the spot, I would say, yes, a little bit more resourcing. I've said we're very part-time, but I think we function in that really important space that I talked about before. I'm very happy to go away think about that specific question in relation to GLA, your committee. And what I did want to say before I go is that I'm really, really happy. I will come and meet anybody over a cup of tea. And Assembly members, I'll come down to City Hall or I'll come to wherever you are locally. I'm really, really happy to do that, have that conversation with individuals or small groups.
Thanks, Steve. That's a really kind offer. And Assembly members do like tea and coffee, so I'm sure you'll be taken up on that. And yes, if you do think of anything, please do write into us after the meeting so we can have a look at that. And thank you for your time today and for all the work you do as well in the community. Thanks. Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair. And kind of started to touch on some of the stuff that I was going to be asking about, but not completely. So I'm going to start by looking at some of the challenges. And first of all, to think about what good community engagement on resilience or a whole society approach actually looks like. So you're obviously working across a lot of different schemes and with lots of different and diverse community groups. So can you tell us what good community engagement on resilience looks like, what your aims are, and how you measure the impact and success of what you're doing?
If I kick off, and I know that Kristen can answer this question, but just I suppose a word of the context first, which is that in our world in resilience, and the same, in particular community work, it can be really difficult to measure. It doesn't sort of lend itself to some of that. But one of the things that Kristen's team, when it comes to communities, but actually in resilience generally, we want to do much better, is think about monitoring and evaluation and how we do that. So it's definitely something that we're kind of generally wanting to work on a bit more. But I know that Kristen can say more on the community side.
Sure, yeah. I mean, like Catherine said, anything in the resilience space is notoriously difficult to measure. But I think that's generally because resilience and community resilience is a very fluffy and kind of often not very well defined kind of thing. And so I think, like we've said before, if you go back to the evidence and say, look at the evidence and the learning from COVID or from the Grenfell Tower fire or from, the Manchester Arena, or look at the Toby Harris's review of preparation for terrorism in London, they all have this. They all kind of say the same things when it comes to the community. The community aspect of it, which is that disconnect that we talked about before. It's the fact that people feel kind of disconnected, and so, like I said, that has been kind of the North Star that we're using. And so our definition, I think our definition has been effectively, we know it looks right if we're helping to make those connections, if we're helping to build those relationships, if we're helping to, kind of, strengthen those and strengthen the capacity of our communities. And I think generally, yeah, it's very difficult to measure, but I think you can sort of solve that problem to some extent by being very, very clear about what it is you're trying to achieve. And I like the fact that people here have been talking about community engagement and not necessarily community resilience, because that is, again, it's kind of a fluffy concept, and people who go around talking about how you can measure that are often, it often doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But if we're very clear about what we're actually trying to achieve here, and we try to build that into each project, so we know that, when we're, trying to do, for example, our Community Resilience Fund, we know exactly what that's about. That's about trying to, get those relationships built and sort of maintained between the statutory authorities and the voluntary sector organizations. And that's about, the capacity building not only of the community organizations, but also of the borough officials who are kind of involved in the training as well, because we do require them to work together on those things. So I think when it comes to the monitoring and evaluation, it's a lot easier for us to be able to say, did we do what we thought we were going to do, because we've set out the aims clearly. And just in terms of monitoring, so we have been doing a bit of that through our project. So we had Kingston University do an evaluation of the first round of the Community Resilience Fund. For the second round, I think it's the second round, we're working with internal GLA intelligence team colleagues to try to work out an evaluation scheme for that. And so we just kind of keep that going on an ongoing basis, because it is important to us to understand, like, are we sort of aiming things in the right way? What can we learn from what we've already done and potentially try to improve?
Thank you. And we've touched on government already, but sort of in particular, sort of looking at the UK government's developing approach to community engagement on resilience. The last government launched the UK Government Resilience Framework, which they said was a first step in their commitment to develop a wide and strategic approach to resilience. And in their document, they state that the emergency powers under the Civil Contingencies Act remain fit for purpose. However, the Grenfell report from Phase 2 has some very specific recommendations for civil contingencies, of the Civil Contingencies Act to be reviewed and amended. So can you speak to those recommendations from the Grenfell report and whether you support them, and what, if any, discussions you've had with the new government about them?
Yes, thank you. So the resilience review that the government is undertaking now is kind of overtaking the framework. Not to say that they're going to unpick it all, but, based on the code and then the Grenfell inquiries, that's, one of the reasons why they did want to look at it again, and in particular this question about the Civil Contingencies Act. So I have, from my conversation with government, I know that they're open to a conversation about the Civil Contingencies Act. And we, in the London Resilience Unit, can certainly see the benefit of that particular recommendation about having a statutory place for community engagement. Thinking through some of the impacts on that, if Steve were here, he might have concerns as well about how that's resourced and how that works. I think it might give us the opportunity to look at other elements of the Civil Contingencies Act, for example, around recovery, where at the minute it's very much focused on the sort of preparation bit, and actually, looking at the Grenfell inquiry and thinking about what really happened there, and the impact on the people and the communities, not just taking each of the recommendations, although we do, and look at them and acting on them, but also taking that step back and thinking, what are we really learning here about the whole system? And for me, there's absolutely a piece in there about the communities and how well the community groups responded. And just going back to something we talked about at the beginning about how you kind of centre people and make people not just, in a part of it, but in the whole resilience system. How do we centre them in it?
Kristen?
Yeah, I think I agree with that, and I would just add, I think that, first of all, I think in the Civil Contingencies Act or in the guidance, there is actually, there are a couple of lines about, working with communities. So there is some stuff in there. And I think, as we were talking about before, the difficulty with kind of understanding these things or measuring resilience or kind of legislating for resilience can be quite difficult, because you can end up with, I come from a long climate adaptation background, and so this is my, this has been my experience with trying to do climate adaptation, but I think it applies also to resilience. You can kind of legislate for that, but you can't do it specifically enough to make it work in every case necessarily. So you can say, well, you must, and I think there is something about must have due regard for communities, like in the planning and things like that. But what that actually means can always be interpreted at the local level. So. You could have some that sort of take that away and go, yeah, and that means we're going to set up this body and we're going to pay people and we're going to, do a whole lot of stuff. And others, it'll be like, well, we sent people a survey and asked their views. And in that case, those could both potentially be meeting the requirements, and, they're very different outcomes. So I think it's an interesting idea, and I'm always in favor of things that would help promote better engagement with communities in this space. But I find it'd be interesting to see how they might work it out.
So you mean you'd want to see sort of safeguards for engagement, with sort of active engagement with communities rather than a tick box survey type engagement?
Yeah, of course, definitely.
Yeah. And then in terms of barriers to community engagement on resilience, it seems, you're doing lots of really good work on the ground, kind of engaging with all the different moving parts within community. Can you tell us about any barriers you've encountered to community engagement, and what more support is needed either from central government or the mayor to actually support that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've done quite a number of reports in this space. So we've done little bits of insights research working with sort of neighborhood networks and with equalities organizations and various others on cohesion and stuff like that. And I think what we found in all of that is that there's a real appetite for this. I mean, people in local communities are keen to get involved. They may not be aware of the official structures, but when they're made aware of it, they're interested. They would like to be involved. And very often, this is not, about us kind of telling them to do stuff. This is more about they're already working in their communities on things that you could very well call resilience, to support the communities in various ways that would help them in, no matter what kind of a crisis. So it's really about us understanding that, bringing that into the conversation. So I think, a lot of that is already happening. I think the problem is often the resource. And I think Steve mentioned what we would call stakeholder fatigue, which is effectively everybody's trying to reach out to communities and, and trying to, deal with them in different ways for different reasons. So I think that's one thing that's kind of an issue. And I think one of the ways that we've actually tried to manage some of that too is actually by, providing contributions to people. So if they are participating in work, that they actually get paid for their time. And that's just, I think that's just good practice at the moment. But I think the barrier is generally, there are, people have lives and everybody's trying to do this in their spare time. And I think, there's a keenness to do it. So I think we should take advantage of that, but it does require resource. And I hate to keep coming back to that point along with Steve and everybody else, but yeah, it does, there is a lot of that.
And at the moment, do you have the resource to be able to do that, for that engagement to be consistent across London, across every borough, or would you say that you urgently need more?
I think we've started to. So we've actually, we're just about to launch in a couple of months, I think, the third round of our Community Resilience Fund. And that is touching every borough in London. So we've now got 22 projects in 22 boroughs that are effectively, these are tiny bits of grant funding. I don't want to get too excited about it. They're little grants that voluntary community sector organizations could apply for, but they would have to demonstrate that they're working in partnership with their borough emergency planning or resilience colleagues. And those projects are doing like all sorts of great work in this space. They're creating like sort of neighborhood asset registers. They're creating plans. They're doing training and all sorts of various things. And I think, so we've been able to do that. Like we've been able to sort of start that process. And, through some of the research projects that we've been able to do, we can, bring in community voluntary and equality sector organizations to participate in our research, and we can pay participation costs. We've been lucky that we've been able to do that, given the money that we've had from CLG. I think, we could always do more, and I think we do need to do more. I think, Steve said, we need a little bit more resource. We could be building on the work that we're doing to reach out to more communities, to be, engaging in other kind of aspects. We've been engaging with them on climate-related stuff, for example. We've been engaging with them on all sorts of things. And I would totally, by the way, I meant to say this before, but I would totally recommend that anyone here attend the faith sector training, the faith leaders training that Steve and Malak from the London Boroughs Faiths Networks run, because it's a really impressive array of training. It's a great program.
When you talked about sort of creating community groups, creating neighbourhood asset registers and plans, just in terms of the resilience of that, because people move, people's circumstances change, different people turn up. What do you have processes for kind of maintaining those kind of assets and of community knowledge, and is there any kind of process for that?
I think nothing totally official at the moment, but I know some of the projects have kind of cited that as something that they're interested in. You know, how do we kind of maintain this and keep it sustainable? But yeah, we don't have, I mean, as a strategic, like, we just don't have the resource necessarily to do that, but it's something that we can be considering. And we're also, obviously, we're collecting up the, you know, the knowledge and insights that are coming from these projects. We've got, like I said, the evaluation going on. We get the different projects together into a room at least one time a year to have some, like a sort of an event. I think we're doing something in March to launch the third round. And we do provide kind of the training and support. So we like to hear from individual projects as well, like about stuff that they're doing. So there are those opportunities to kind of do some of that sharing of information. But in terms of how do we come up with a mechanism for maintaining that, I'm not sure how that's working. But I mean, we're not necessarily able to do that, you know, for the long term.
Mm-hmm. It just seems like that knowledge is so valuable. It's having some way of keeping it all together is, would be helpful. I've just got one final question, which is that in the barriers that you found in some of your research, one of them was not seeing the value in neighbourhood networks, leading to a cycle of disengagement. And I just wondered what actual actions you're taking to try and deal with that as an issue.
Yeah, I think it was partly why we did the project, because it was just like, we knew, you know, that during COVID, for example, loads of like neighborhood networks or WhatsApp groups and things like that all kind of sprung up. And so I think, you know, the findings of that were just, you know, I think kind of lent to the approach that we've continued to take, which is, you know, just try and do this engagement, recognize that they're there, or recognize that, you know, they can potentially use more support and more, you know, and you know, just try to take on the recommendations of that report, and again try to build some of those relationships and engagement. And we definitely try to take the recommendations from each of those kinds of reports and incorporate them into the work that we're doing in the future and understand better.
Great, thanks very much. Thank you, Chair.
Assemblymember McCartney.
Yes, thank you. I just want to ask about the fact that the government's announced that there will be a national pandemic response exercise this autumn, and I just want to know what the GLA's role is in that and how that helps you develop your resilience.
Thank you. Yeah, that's right. Of course, pandemics remain right at the top of the national and the London risk register. So as you said, there's a national, they call it a Tier 1 exercise, which means that they will have lots of activity from kind of Secretaries of State, government departments, and then right down to the local response. So they have written out to all the LRFs around the country to see who wants to be involved. And of course, as you expect in London, we're kind of front of the queue of people who want to be kind of very much involved in that. So I don't think we've worked out yet what the detail of that will look like, and happy to kind of, you know, update you as that becomes clearer. But yeah, we'll be very much kind of involved in that.
Thank you, because I noticed that when they announced it, they said they were encouraging significant involvement at a local level. And I'm just wondering, is that just at the like local authority level, or does that include the communities that we've been talking about today?
It's a really good question, because you know, for any exercise like this, I think there's some ability for us to say how we would like that to look. And one of the things that we're really clear about is wanting to include, you know, as we keep talking about, bringing people in and bringing communities in, including in training and exercising. So yeah, I absolutely think it's an opportunity for that. The times when it can be difficult is if there are sort of very sensitive things, or, you know, there's sometimes like security issues and that kind of thing. But I would hope that we would find some way to involve communities.
Thank you. And my final question on this is that obviously we knew from the COVID pandemic that actually it was often the most vulnerable people that were the worst affected, and they might not be represented by any particular organisation. Is there scope when you do exercises like that, or outside exercises in general, about engaging with those groups that are often overlooked?
Yes, so it's something, again, that came out really strongly through the Grenfell and COVID inquiries as a kind of general theme. So we've been writing a new strategy for London Resilience, kind of drawing together the two strategies that were there before from the LRF side and the GLA side. And we've set out a number of guiding principles, and one of those is around kind of equity, and in particular looking at exactly vulnerable people, vulnerable communities, and making sure in our planning that we're kind of taking that into account and taking people into account. We'll also rely on Steve and LSEP and our colleagues there to help us kind of tap into some of the kind of where it's at community level. But yes, it's something that we're really conscious of.
And Kristen, you want to come in?
Yeah, aside from all that too, we did a little piece of insights research a little while ago on the role of equalities organizations in response and in kind of emergency planning, because for exactly that reason, because we know that people are not affected equally by incidents. You know, we know that people with more resources have more choice and have more ability to do different things, to plan. But we also know that, you know, in some cases the incident or emergency happens because that, you know, people have been targeted because of their identity. So we did a little piece of work around equalities organizations, and they were very keen potentially to be involved. And one of the recommendations of that work was that we set up a panel, or sort of a sub-panel, maybe like the faith sector panel, that is equalities organizations, and helping to make sure that we have them kind of represented as part of the LSEP, or as part of that, you know, that wider community voice on the LRF.
Thank you.
Thanks. Assemblymember Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Would you say, I'm going to come to Catherine, would you say that the work on resilience has seen any kind of change in the way that the GLA relates to external organisations and community groups through LSEP or otherwise?
So I joined the GLA 6 months ago from MHCLG, and so I suppose I can only, in terms of how the GLA is working, can only speak to that time. I mean, bringing together those two teams that I was just speaking about into the London Resilience Unit, part of the point of doing that was to make sure that we had a kind of coherent unit that, yes, is thinking about preparation and response to emergencies, but is also thinking about communities and long-term risk and chronic risk. So I would hope that through that, people, partners, communities will see a more kind of joined up and maybe easier to understand approach, kind of looking at all of that. But as I say, having, from my personal experience, only really covers the last 6 months.
So what about the sort of links with groups where the GLA has already had established community engagement? Have you been able to sort of tap into already established relationships, although obviously that does then run the risk of engagement fatigue, which I think Kristen just referred to. Have you been able to tap into, I mean, obviously there are a number of groups that we have relationships with already through a number of the different pieces of work that go on from the building.
If I can just start, and I'm sure Kristen will want to add to this, that one of the things that we want to do, and that comes from the government as well, is about integrating resilience into all policies, so that we are not in our kind of LRF world here while the rest of the world goes on there, but really integrated into all policies. And so one of the things that that also Kristen leads actually is about how we work with colleagues in the GLA to make sure that we are sort of leveraging different groups or different funding or different policy making to make sure that kind of resilience is built in throughout.
Do you think that's happening then properly? I mean, if I went and spoke to anybody at all in the building and said resilience, what does it mean to you? What do you think they'd tell me?
I would be really interested to know. And of course, you know, I speak to lots of people about resilience. So I think it really depends. I think there's a lot more to do in that space in particular. And I think it's fair to say it is something that nobody, as far as I am aware, throughout the country or internationally has really cracked, because it is really difficult. So it does, you know, this is a space where London are very much kind of thought leaders in how we're doing it. I have conversations with colleagues in Cabinet Office who essentially have the same issue, which is how do they get resilience out of, you know, civil contingencies and into all of those government departments. So it's not just a problem for us. I mean, one of the ways in which we do it is I was speaking to all of our senior leaders, I think it was just last week, about our GLA Gold role. So that's where somebody senior in the GLA can represent the GLA during an emergency. And so having a kind of people throughout the organisation who take on that role regularly, actually, I think is a really good way to get them thinking about all the different kind of bits of resilience and then take that back into their roles.
I actually think it's really difficult to get people to think about things before they've actually happened. I certainly remember I sit on the now Fire Committee, but it used to be the FREP Committee, Fire Resilience and Emergency Planning Committee, sat down and looked at the London risk register and thought some of these risks are really rated very low for something that would have an enormously high impact. And I actually think it's really difficult. I mean, look at the, you know, LA, which has just been engulfed, probably still is burning to the ground right now, even as we speak. And they rather foolishly started cutting the money that they gave to the fire service because obviously they thought they wouldn't need the fire service to deal with wildfires. Kristen, did you want to come in on how effective we've been at either getting staff across the GLA or getting groups that we're already working with involved in the resilience piece?
Sure, yeah. I mean, so we are in constant conversations with teams across the GLA, particularly teams that are doing a lot of very concentrated, you know, sort of community engagement work. So we work with the communities team, we work with the equalities team, with the migration team. They have been very involved in helping us to, helping advise us on some of these projects and help us make sure that we're kind of turning them the right way, and including the equalities bit of research that we did as well. And, you know, so they've been very involved in that, you know, and of course working with other teams across the GLA in terms, like working on, for example, climate change adaptation and those types of things, and also kind of offering out. And, you know, Catherine was mentioning resilience as a cross-cutting principle and the engagement that we do. We've also been working with, you know, some of the delivery plans, trying to help, you know, provide helpful comments and things on that, but also engaging with other areas of work where we know they might want to have some community engagement around something, whether it's something around heatwave planning, for example, or whatever. And we can say, look, we have really great neighborhood networks here. And actually, you know, a lot of the work that we're doing is effectively resilience, regardless of whether you're calling it that. So how about we, you know, try to collaborate on this, and so that maybe we're not all kind of going at people from different angles, and we're, you know, collaborating a bit and, you know, potentially working and piggybacking on each other's kind of initiatives.
So, Catherine, has there been much evaluation then of the work that's been undertaken with the additional funding that's come through the Community Resilience Fund? Are we evaluating how successful this work has been? The relationships that Kristen has just described that are being built up in specific neighbourhoods. Do we have a picture of that?
Yeah, so we've got, so for the Community Resilience Fund, we've got Kingston University doing an evaluation. So they did an evaluation of the first round of the funding, sort of an ongoing evaluation as the year was progressing. And we're working with the GLA's intelligence team at the moment on an evaluation of the second round of the project. So it is actually just, you know, trying to work out, what have we been able to do. But like I was saying earlier, I mean, we've tried to really build in the ability to monitor and evaluate by being quite clear from the beginning about what it is we're actually trying to achieve. Like, we're not sitting here saying we're going to increase resilience, because that doesn't really have much meaning. But we're thinking, can we, what can we do about, introducing people to each other and making those connections with people and trying to build that trust.
So is the evaluation from Kingston University, is that available? Is that something that we could see? Would you be able to send that to us? I think we'd like to have a look at that. So, and what particular outcomes would you say where we have improved with local neighbourhoods? Could you actually give me an example?
Yeah, well, I can tell you, in local neighborhoods, I think in Merton and Wandsworth, I think we can talk about in Merton, we worked with the Commonside Community Development Trust. So that was the project that we worked on, and they've been doing fact sheets and toolkits and checklists, and other types of outputs, including like working with partners to discuss local risks and concerns and locally like identified strengths. So they've been doing that kind of strengths and weaknesses analysis and that type of thing. In Wandsworth, we've been working with the Earlsfield Community Land Trust. So they've been the grantees in that in Wandsworth. And so, yeah, they've been working on a project that is looking to take the lessons from COVID and other types of emergencies and create what they're calling a community-centered framework. So involving all the stakeholders and working out what kinds of responses they could potentially hold. So we've got little like examples of this happening in the 22 boroughs that we've got projects in, and it involves things like, organizing training for the local community. We've actually had a little bit of resource come in from Bloomberg Associates, who support the GLA on various sustainability-related issues. We've had them working with us on this. We've recruited them to go out and work with our Round 1 projects to do some training and kind of support specifically around climate-related risk, so heat waves and floods. And I think there have been loads of different kinds of projects where people have been doing sort of community mapping and asset mapping exercises and, capacity building sort of training. We've been very hands-off as far as, telling people what they need to do, but, we don't want to be prescriptive about that. But it is just literally about people, getting that understanding, making those connections, and kind of understanding where they're at and what kind of assets they have in their communities to potentially help.
So how are we, that's great to hear that there's very specific projects that you can mention in my constituency in both boroughs. I'm assuming then you're saying that 23 out of 32 boroughs we could identify, a similar sort of project in each borough. How are those projects then seeding out into the rest of the area? Because I could name a number of other sort of very localised community groups who may not be having any kind of conversation with the Commonside Trust or the Earlsfield Land Trust either. Are they spreading it out from those? Because otherwise you're getting a very resilient small area within a borough, but it's not then spreading out to the rest of the borough. And there might be some parts of the borough that particularly need to be resilient where we're not addressing it, because there might be some nearer to a river, or overheating or something like that might be a particular issue.
Absolutely, and I think we recognize that. I think when we were evaluating the bids, and we did a very sort of not too cumbersome bidding process for this, because we know we're not talking about loads and loads of money here. We recognize that we're not going to be able to cover everything, but we did try to prioritize organizations that we felt, or who told us maybe they did have a little bit more, of a reach out into different communities. And so we don't know for sure, because I think that's still going to be part of the evaluation. But like I said, we're working internally with GLA Intelligence, and I think we can make sure that that's kind of on the register for things that we need to be looking into for the next evaluation.
Oh, okay, so there'll be more information coming through from the GLA Intelligence evaluation. Yeah. So what's the plan for when the funding runs out, if you like, or are we expecting there to be more funding coming through? Looking at Catherine for an answer on that one.
So I'm not sure in terms of what future funding will be coming. I do know that we will be working with government where we get our funding from, to make sure that we are sharing with them the benefits as we've shared with you. I know that, again, especially having come from MHCLG, that London is seen as a place where there's a huge amount of good practice going on. So I would be as confident as I can be that the bids that we put in will be successful. But as we've heard today, the kind of funding and especially kind of longer term, funding beyond a year or so is definitely a challenge.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That could have been a scripted response, couldn't it, on Merton Wandsworth? Very interesting. Assembly Member Boff.
Thank you very much. Ms Richardson, you said that London are the thought leaders with regard to resilience. What international agencies have informed those thoughts?
So different members of the team talk to lots of kind of international colleagues. So, for example, I have regular discussions with Stockholm and Washington, but we also, again, thinking back to my personal experience from the sort of national government experience in resilience, having a sense of kind of what's going on internationally, I think there's more we could do actually to learn from international examples, and even within the UK. It's not about saying that London is in the lead on every aspect of this, but what we do have in London is a kind of better resourced and more mature, resilient sort of system than most places.
The Mayor of Bristol, the former Mayor of Bristol, they don't have a mayor anymore, but the former Mayor of Bristol was quite proud of his resilience strategy, and implicit in that was engagement with international agencies. I don't see that present in these reports.
I could say a little bit about that. So my role was originally established because we were working with the Rockefeller 100 Resilient Cities Network. That was several years ago. We've undergone many changes since then.
Sorry, which organisation?
The Rockefeller 100 Resilient Cities. That no longer exists. It's now been sort of transformed into the Resilient Cities Network, which is an international network of cities that are doing various types of resilience practice, mostly thinking about those kind of wider societal resilience. So it's not about emergency planning and so forth. Bristol was part of that network. They are no longer, as far as I know. And I know that when the funding from Rockefeller ran out, not all cities continued to have a resilience strategy or a person in place to kind of coordinate that work. We know. So, yeah, I mean, I think, like Catherine was saying, there are, some good international examples. We do participate in those networks, and we're, always really happy to, provide the practice that we've done. But we're also really interested in really good practice that's happening elsewhere.
Good. Can I recommend to you that back in March 2023, the Council of Europe did a piece of work about resilient cities in Europe. And it's worth chasing up on that. Their rapporteur in that case is a very approachable person, and it may be worth listening to those examples from place. Admittedly, some of them are earthquakes, which don't often happen in the UK, but they've experienced floods, they've experienced wildfire, they've experienced civil unrest. And of course, one of the important things about that is that they were concerned with is about engagement with communities, and they've learnt those lessons about how communities, if they are active and connected with, can help resolve those issues. All right, just a recommendation. If we move on to the community liaison proper, could you tell me, Ms. Guida, what... Did I pronounce your name right? Go and tell us. It is that. It is that. Thank you very much. Can you tell us, Ms. Guida, what involvement there have been, or what liaison there is with uniformed organisations?
Sure. We work with them in a variety of different ways, right? So, for example, in the faith leaders training that Steve was talking about that he runs, we involve blue light people in those things all the time. We involve sort of NHS people, police get involved, I think, just to provide sort of their bits of the training. So we do training. That training covers things like sort of health-related stuff. It involves like sort of building security and hate crime and other types of issues. So they get involved in that training to the extent that they're involved with those types of programs. But like I said, I mean, in the, for example, in the Community Resilience Fund, we asked communities to bid in, but they had to demonstrate that they were working with their kind of statutory resilience partners in that work. So we want them to be kind of involved in sort of building those relationships.
But there are also other organisations that aren't directly associated. Things, and I'm sure Len Duval would, if he was sitting here, would say, what liaison have you had with the British Legion, which have incredible links to veteran organisations and reserves organisations. And I just wondered if you'd actively gone to look at those areas of the military that should be involved and liaise with.
It's a really good question. I don't know that we've actually looked at the British Legion, but we should. I think in general, when we hear about...
Work is done then.
I think in general, when we hear about really interesting practice that's going on in interesting projects, we do try to reach out to those. I should say, my team are... amazing and dedicated, and it's quite a small team of people. So we are, we do try to follow up on all those types of leads whenever we can. But yeah,
I'm pleased you have those contacts. I was quite close to when the barking fire went up. It was on my street, and the person, he was a 15-year-old member of the cadets, fire cadets. Marshalled everyone out of the way, got all the cars off of the street, cleared the road ready for the fire engines, identified where they could put their hoses and everything, and it was magnificent to be barked at by this 15-year-old and all the adults doing what he's told because he knew what he was doing, and unless we have that liaison with people on the ground, we're not going to be able to have a joined-up approach when it comes to this, which moves me on to my next question. I looked through your equalities engagement report, and I saw no specific engagement with youth organisations.
Yeah, it's a gap, but it is something that we've been talking about. It's something we want to do, I think, in this coming year.
Well, can I recommend to you, to start that process is to liaise with the London Youth Assembly.
Yeah.
Which mirrors our organisation, to get that youth perspective on response to disasters.
Yeah, and we do have good connections with youth organisations within my team as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask quickly on kind of vetting of community groups, especially when giving grants out and things like that. How do you work that? Is that something that happens in the team?
I'm not sure. Is that something I could write to you on, please, Chair?
Yeah, and I think obviously it's an important point, especially at the point at which the GLA is giving money to community groups. It's effectively endorsing the work and say if they do something in response to an incident that is perhaps not what we would want to happen at that point, and perhaps if something arose from that, that would at that point become our problem or could be traced back to be our problem. So I'd be really interested to see what we're doing to avoid that situation that hopefully would never happen. I don't see any other hands across the Assembly, so across the committee, sorry. So that, can I thank you both for joining us for this discussion today. It's been really interesting. And we may have some follow-up questions just to write to you if that's okay, as well as some of the information I think you've promised here today that we'd love to receive. So with that, feel free to leave. Feel free to stay around if you're having a great time.
Thank you so much.
No one ever accepts that offer, though, strangely. Yeah. Can I ask the committee to note the report as background to putting questions to the invited guests and note the subsequent discussion?
Noted.
Thank you. And can I ask members to delegate authority to the chair in consultation with the deputy chair and party group lead members to agree any output arising from... Brilliant, thank you. With that said, can we take a break for 5 minutes and come back to do workforce report? And thanks again to our guests. Welcome back to the second part of today's London Assembly Oversight Committee meeting. Can I welcome to the Chamber... no, it's not. We don't have Shakira Kedo, sorry.
Only if you turn on the microphone. We can't hear your apologies. And you might have to move it over near you as well.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Shall I introduce? Sorry, we have Diane Tranmer, Executive Director of Corporate Resources and Business Improvement, and Gemma Cullen, Deputy Assistant Director for Human Resources and Organisational Development. So, Gemma, sorry, I think you were going to say something about Shakira.
Yes, I just wanted to give my apologies for Shakira's absence. She's off sick today.
Okay. All right. Well, we hope she gets better soon. I wanted to come straight to the workforce report and just basically ask some of the questions. Something that we've been interested as a committee before, and I was really pleased to see improved this year, is the representation of disabled people within our, or those stating they have a disability within our workforce. So could either of you say a bit about that and why that's stats gone up? Is that getting people to perhaps declare, or is that a improvement of hiring?
So I don't know if you're aware, but we've had a really strong drive towards the end of last year around our diversity data. And we've really just been focusing on getting more people engaged in the process and completing the diversity data and just getting them more confident in the process and how we use that information. So that has seen an increase in our data.
Thanks. And one thing we've asked previously is about, and I think this would be part of that drive, is trying to capture perhaps people who've been in the organisation for a long time, and so perhaps when they joined didn't have a disability, but now they would have a disability that they'd refer to. Is that something that's being captured as part of that?
Absolutely, yeah. So there's been a focus on sort of particular areas, and one of the areas is sort of around length of service, and just making sure that people who have been here for 2 years or less and more have been engaging in the process and completing their diversity data.
Thanks. And the GLA headcount we still see is rising. One particular directorate where there's a significant increase year on year and year is the Strategy and Communications Directorate. Did you want to talk to why we're seeing such a rise there?
Yeah, some of that is some of the work has transferred over from the London Fire Brigade to support the London Resilience Unit. So there was a significant transfer of staff and responsibilities from the London Fire Brigade into the Strategy and Comms Unit, which are responsible for the London Situational Awareness Team.
Thanks. And something I've consistently raised is when we look at being reflective of London's workforce, the Assembly is predominantly women. It's now 64%, I think, this year. Is that something that we are looking at in terms of making sure that we're hiring men as well? Because we are obviously very concerned in other areas when we don't look like London. Is that an area where you're looking?
Yeah.
To be honest, I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's an area that we are particularly focusing on in terms of the balance of getting the gender thing. I think we do monitor. We look very closely, and things can change quite rapidly, especially when they're sort of relatively small numbers. So I think at the moment we are particularly targeting areas around making sure that we've got female representation, making sure that we've got numbers around disability. We're looking at numbers particularly around ethnicity. I'm not sure it's an area we have specifically targeted, but it is an area that we are monitoring actively at the moment.
It would be good to look at, I think, when we look at, because we do look at trying to be reflective of the workforce across, workforce population across the piece. It seems that that's one area that we don't look at, but it would be good to at least be looking at it, I think, and it's something I've raised previously.
Yeah, we will pick that up. And
Chair,
have a look at that.
also, we've got to look that 70% of this committee is female as well. So, you know, perhaps we should get our own house in order.
The Assembly isn't, so it's just
no, well, the Assembly in general.
Picking to come on oversight.
Well, the Conservatives doing all they can to make it predominantly male, but anyway, that's our problem. Yeah, something for us to consider in the same way we would consider, and so I think that's why as well the GLA should be looking at it. The other question I had was around the Newham specific employment. How is that working? Or why didn't the opening up to Newham-based residents first before looking at the wider cohort of applications?
So we still have the process in place where Newham applicants where roles are advertised on the Newham website. I don't think there's anything more that I can add in that space.
There's still the process when you're doing the selection that Newham is put through for the first review before you go through the set. So that process is in place to ensure that as part of that commitment to moving here that we actually review candidates from Newham as a first cut, and then you sift through the remaining candidates. So that process is in place. But obviously we've got to look at getting the right person for every single role. So I can assure anybody that process is working and still happening, but we then will appoint the right person, the best person for each role.
So when you say it's working, is that having an effect on the hiring at all? Is there a higher base of Newham residents getting employed as a result? What's the effect after that hiring process?
We don't have the numbers on that one specifically here. Let me come back and give you that as a specific answer, so I've got that information for you.
Okay, thank you. And actually, sorry, one final thing I wanted to raise was it was really good to see the turnover decreasing this year. Something this committee has constantly raised has obviously been picking up the City Hall relocation in terms of questionnaires, which we don't get at this point of review in the workforce. But is that something that is perhaps decreasing? Is it anecdotally, do you think now people are situated here in the new City Hall? Is that as a reason for perhaps leaving, helping towards reducing that turnover as we get more established here in the new location?
Sorry, what's the question?
So as we've always been concerned here that the relocation of City Hall has not only led to a greater turnover of staff, but also the other aspect being not attracting the same people that would have once wanted to work in City Hall. So we see the turnover coming down. Would you attribute any of that to the fact that City Hall is now very settled here in its new base and people are now comfortable, people aren't going to be leaving because City Hall's not in London Bridge?
Thank you for that clarification. So I think we'll need to come back to you on if there's been any specific feedback in the last leavers reasons around location. But in terms of attraction, I don't think it is affecting just because of the numbers of applications that we are dealing with for any roles that we go externally. We're literally dealing with hundreds at the pre-SIF stage. So attraction's not the issue. But in terms of turnover, it's definitely reduced, as you've seen. But we'll need to come back to you on the figures as to whether anybody's implicated location as a reason for that.
Thank you. Assemblymember Baker.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got a couple of things to pick up on the report. Firstly, wanted to look at the agency workers' figures. So they are, I believe they are going down. Obviously, there's always, acknowledge there's always going to be some need for some temporary staff there, but obviously it's not healthy to have lots. Just ask specifically, there's quite high percentages in both the Chief Finance Officer's Directorate and the Corporate Resources and Business Improvement Directorate. Is there anything specific going on there that's leading to large? Basically, is that flagging anything for you? Is that something you're looking at?
So I think we've spoken about this before. Yeah. I've picked up as well these. Yeah. So corporate resources and business improvement is my area. We have quite a significant proportion of agency workers.
Yes.
You will notice they're starting to come down. Part of that is we had a number of agency workers, particularly working on their transition, so some of the transitions over to shared services. The delay on that has meant that we are still holding a number of agency workers for longer than I would like. I think that we are, as part of the replanning for the IT shared services, we need to look at the best way of actually managing that project and whether or not keeping and retaining temporary staff is the best way of doing it. So that is part of the work that I've got in the next couple of months, as soon as we've got feedback from TfL on what that IT shared services transition is now going to look at. I want to make sure that we've got the resources in the right place to manage that and support it. So we are carrying more in corporate resources and business improvement than I would like or would expect.
Yeah, and is that the reason? Is that the reason that there's so many off establishment posts? Is that the right phrase? Yes, sorry. They're working on the transition.
They're in roles.
Yeah, because that's a big number, and obviously that's not ideal, really. But if they're working on that specific project, that's what explains that. Yeah. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Gemma?
To come back on Emma's point about the reason for leaving as location, so I've just got the figure there. One person gave the relocation as a secondary reason for leaving in 2024.
Yeah. I mean, we would expect that to go down over time, because if it was that much of a problem, then it'd be a problem. Yeah, thanks for that. So then I wanted to ask about the leavers information, which seemed to have quite a large proportion of other involuntary leavers, which obviously is a bit of a catch-all, but can cover some not particularly nice stuff. So sort of that figure being a bit high might be of concern. If you've got anything that sort of illuminate that a little bit.
So that covers off things like retirement, non-starters, so people that were due to start but then didn't actually start. Okay. Very low numbers there, and early voluntary severance arrangements.
So those are the categories. So that, I would think, should be relatively stable from year to year. But that is up, I think. So is there any reasons behind?
I'll need to come back to you.
Yeah,
yes.
Could you?
Yeah.
Could you? Yes. Right. The recognition payments. This is obviously, it's one of those things that, well, I think it looks a little bit unusual from the outside, to be honest. Not that people shouldn't be rewarded for work they're doing and everything like that, but so the number of and I believe you've changed the process, so the number of recognition payments has increased. We don't really have any data on how that breaks down across grade or salary. Is that something that you could provide to us?
Look into that, yeah.
And I suppose, like I say, I'm sure none of us would want people not to be rewarded, but it doesn't seem the most rigorous way of making sure that additional work that's being done is, I suppose, is that being done because they're having to cover work that isn't being done elsewhere? Are there problems with structure and stuff like that? So from my point of view, it should only be for something very, very exceptional, and not to cover sort of wider problems with workload or anything like that. Are you confident that's the case? Do you have any information on the sort of thing, or any breakdown on the sort of thing that those payments would come forward for?
So we don't collate data on the sort of reasons or what catchment the reasons fall into, but what I can say is where it's people, where we have situations where people are covering other people's work or work at a higher grade, there is a very separate arrangement for that. Yes. So you have acting up and honorarium arrangements, and we are very clear when those nominations are coming through. If it's covered if the request has been to cover it that way, the pushback will be this is the appropriate route.
So that's definitely sifted for if that comes in. It's just like, so I mean, I think it would be. Well, maybe we do want to know what they're doing, because that sounds, doing extra work, but exceptional work. But is that something that you could give us a bit of a flavour of the types of categories?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It just feels like, obviously, anything like this potentially could be subject to a bit of bias, a bit of favouritism or anything like that. So a bit more of an understanding for us about what the oversight is, I think, would be helpful.
Okay.
Is that that okay? Yeah. And finally, we've got the section on learning and development, which is really interesting. But what it doesn't have is any data in terms of numbers of courses or sort of chunks of learning and where that's being done across the organisation, again, by grade or department or directorate or anything like that. Again, so we can understand whether everyone's getting an equal opportunity to take up learning and development if they want to. Is that something that we can look at in future?
Yes, I believe that level of information is planned for the next iteration.
Oh, fantastic.
Of the report, so.
Well, that's great. And that's everything from me.
Thank you, Assembly Member Baker. Assembly Member Boff.
How many staff in the Planning Directorate?
I don't have that to hand.
It's okay.
To you. Apologies.
Please, if you could write to me, including the grades and what changes there's been in that directorate over the past couple of years.
So grades and the changes.
Yes, please, and also the Mayor's office. What changes there have been that over the past couple of years, and if you could break it down to the politically restricted posts as well. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you, Chair, but you've pretty much covered everything I was going to do, so that's all right. No problem. Thank you.
I didn't do one of yours, did I?
No.
Sorry, I will ask a couple more questions if that's okay. I don't know if either of you want to say anything around the impact of the cyber attack and the resulting recruitment freeze that we had because of the HR system as well.
Okay, so in terms of the cyber attack, TfL is still in those final stages of actually, they still haven't come out of the final bits of their cyber attack. We know that there are a number of systems that still aren't available to TfL in GLA. We have access to all of the systems, but that may mean that in some cases we are having to come into the office to access those systems, which is causing frustration, particularly for individuals who are having to spend most of their work is on those applications or systems, and particularly with staff who are disabled. So that remote access is a real challenge. I think you are aware that when Shashi Verma was here, he has committed that it is a high priority from TfL, but it is a big piece of work in restoring that access and making sure that it is safe and secure, and that we aren't making creating any vulnerabilities in that. That is a key priority for us in terms of the cyber attack and the impact on our people. It's one area that I'm particularly aware of in terms of the pulse survey and how some of our staff are feeling. So it is a real priority for me to get that access restored and enable us to get back to the type of working that we were doing really before that cyber attack. There was a pause on recruitment. We had to some extent planned a pause. If you know, we were upgrading to success factors. So in a way, the pause that we had coincided with a planned pause. So it affected us, but perhaps less than it could have done. In that period of time, we had prepared the organisation for the fact it wasn't going to be able to recruit. Recruitment is now back and is back available, so all areas of the business have been able to recruit for some time. I'm not aware recently of areas where people have said they've been unable to access support in being able to recruit. So that is something, I haven't had any feedback saying that's a particular problem. The other area that I am conscious of is that for some of our new starters, they haven't yet got the equipment that they would be expecting to have on day one. We have now got all of that equipment available, and we are rolling that out to any member of staff who started but hasn't yet got it. So that is a key priority for us as well.
Thank you. And finally, on the equal group recommendations, we're seeing them next month, I believe, or we're talking through the equal group recommendations more next month. But is there anything that either of you wanted to add on those implementations and and consequence on the workforce report?
Nothing more to add.
I don't think so. I think there's a lot of progress being made. What I would say is that we've sort of, you would have picked it up from the workforce report, that actually we're starting to look at what next. So the fact that the Equal Report is coming to those recommendations for a period of time, there's quite a lot of detail we've put in where the organisation under Shakira and Gemma is working very closely to start looking at the next iteration of what we want to do on equality, diversity and inclusion. So that's very much about, how do we build on that, not kind of big tick finish. This is now about where do we go, how do we build, what are the challenges that we need to face and move on from there.
Thanks. There's a couple of outstanding requests from the last year that we made in relation to information we wanted about, from the workforce report. I know this has been brought up with Mary, but could ask again if you could revisit those and make sure that the committee gets that information.
Apologies if that's outstanding. We'll pick that up.
Thank you. And if I could be hopeful, and perhaps there's been a couple of requests this meeting, if we weren't asking for them next year, if they could come as swiftly as possible, that would be much appreciated.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I can't see any other hands, so with that, I'll thank you both for coming today. Again, offer exist. You can wait for the end of the meeting, but feel free to pack up and leave as you want. Thank you for coming and answering those questions. We really appreciate it. Can I ask the committee to note the report as background to putting questions to the invited guests and note the subsequent discussion? And can I ask... Thanks, that was a nice chorus. And can I ask the committee to delegate authority to the chair in consultation with the deputy chair and party group lead members to agree any output arising from the discussion? Thank you. Okay. The GLA Oversight Committee work plan. Can I ask the committee to note its work programme for 24-25? Thank you. Date next meeting, we will be here on the 27th of February 2025. There's no other urgent business, so this meeting is closed.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.